On the night of February 12, 2017, a sheriff in Northern California got on the radio and told 188,000 people to evacuate immediately and head north. Not to wait until the morning, right now, in the dark, in the rain, all at once. They were running from the tallest dam in the United States, 770 feet tall, holding back the second largest reservoir in California. And the people downstream had maybe an hour before, as far as any of them knew, a wall of water came crashing down the valley and took all the towns with it. And here is the part that makes this story worth telling. The dam was fine. The structure itself, the giant embankment, the thing all those people were running from, never moved. It did not crack. It did not slump. It did its job that night, and it's still doing it today. The thing that nearly killed all those people was a strip of concrete just off to the side of the dam, a chute most of those families had never thought about once in their lives, and a problem that had been sitting in plain sight in photographs and inspection reports for the last 50 years. I'm Sean. I'm a hydropower engineer. Last time, I told you about a flawless dam that held while the valley below it drowned. This time, it's almost the mirror image. A lot of you remember the headlines and the evacuation. What almost no one remembers is how close it actually was, or that the dam itself never failed at all. And I'll be straight with you before we start. I cannot tell this one from a safe distance, because when it happened, I had the detailed drawings of this dam sitting on my desk at work, just miles away. I'll get back to that. This is how the safest looking giant in America came within a few feet of catastrophe, with the warnings visible the entire time. To understand Oroville, you have to start with water that California could not control. In December of 1955, a series of storms slammed into the northern Sierra, and the Feather River broke loose. Downstream, the levee at Yuba City failed in the middle of the night, and the flood killed dozens of people and drove tens of thousands out of their homes. It was one of the worst floods in the state's history. California had been studying a dam at Oroville for years already. The 1955 flood ended the studying. The state committed to a plan it called the Feather River Project, which became the backbone of something much larger, the California State Water Project, a system designed to catch water in the wet, mountainous north and move it hundreds of miles to the farms and cities of the much drier south. I want to be clear about the ambition here, because it matters. This was not a modest flood control dam. This was the keystone of the most expensive public works project the state had ever attempted, a piece of infrastructure that some 20 million people would depend on for drinking water. Everything about Oroville was supposed to be the biggest and the best, and they nearly pulled it off. What they built is staggering even now. An earth dam, 770 feet high, taller than any dam in the country, then or since. Nearly a mile and a third long across the crest, around 78 million cubic yards of material, holding back a lake that can store more than 3.5 million acre-feet of water. And here is the first thing to understand about it, because it becomes the whole point later. Oroville is what we call a zoned earthfill embankment. Picture a man-made mountain built in careful layers. At its heart is a core of dense, impervious clay that the water cannot penetrate. Around that core are transition zones, and then enormous outer shoulders of gravel and rock that give the whole thing its weight and its strength. An embankment like this does not hold the water back by being rigid. It holds it back by being huge and heavy and very, very well drained. A well-built earthen dam is one of the most forgiving structures in my entire field. It flexes, it settles. It is designed so that water moving through the ground gets caught and carried away safely, rather than building up pressure. Oroville was, and still is, an excellent piece of engineering. I have no quarrel with how the dam was constructed. Hold on to that, because almost everything that went wrong at Oroville went wrong somewhere else. Now look at the layout, because this is the map you need in your head for the rest of the story. The embankment crosses the river. At its foot, buried inside the rock, is the Edward Hyatt Power Plant, at the time the largest underground power station in the country. And then, set apart from the dam, on a separate saddle of ground to the side, sit the two spillways. The spillways are how you let water out of the lake when it gets too full. They are not part of the embankment. They are separate concrete structures on separate ground. There are two of them. The first is the main spillway, sometimes called the service or flood control spillway. There's a set of radial gates at the top of a long concrete chute, about 3,000 feet of it, running down the hillside to the Feather River. When the lake is high, you open the gates and send the water roaring down that chute in a controlled manner. The second is the emergency spillway, and I'm going to ask you to remember exactly what that is because it is the heart of this story. The emergency spillway is just a long concrete lip, or weir, at the rim of the reservoir. Below that lip is a bare, natural hillside. No chute, no channel, just dirt and trees and rock. The logic was that the emergency spillway would essentially never be used. The main spillway was designed for sufficient capacity for everything short of a historic flood, while the emergency spillway was a last resort, a place for water to dribble over in the worst case scenario. So nobody armored the hillside below it. Nobody lined it. Why would you pave a hillside for a flood that would never come? File that decision away. It's going to come back in about 50 years and nearly take 6 towns with it. One more thing about this dam that you should know. Oroville was built with hundreds of instruments buried inside it. Gauges that measure water pressure deep in the fill sections. Markers that measure how the earth settles and shifts. The engineers wanted the dam to be able to tell them how it was feeling. And they called it affectionately, the dam that talks back. And it did talk. The tragedy of Oroville is not that the structure stayed silent. It's that the part of the dam that failed was the part that nobody had wired for sound. The dam talked. The concrete beside it had been talking too, in cracks and water stains, for half a century. We just decided that it was saying nothing important. Building this thing was its own epic. Work on the site began in 1961. To make room for the future lake, they first had to move a highway and reroute 15 miles of the Western Pacific Railroad around what would become the reservoir. Then, they started stacking the mountain. And here is the detail I love. A lot of the material that became the tallest dam in America came from the old gold country right downstream. The Oroville area had been torn up by gold dredging decades earlier, leaving long ridges of washed river gravel piled across the landscape. Those tailings were close, and they were exactly the kind of clean, rounded rock you want for the shoulders of an embankment. So crews loaded that gravel onto work trains and hauled it, load after load after load, to the dam. The haul operation ran on the old rail line, the very stretch of Western Pacific track that had been abandoned when they rerouted the railroad. 2 trains worked it. Each one pulled around 40 cars of fill, running roughly 5 miles to the dam site, one going out loaded, one coming back empty, over and over, all day, every day. It was relentless, ordinary, industrial work. Until it wasn't. On that line, about 3 miles north of town, the track ran through an old railroad tunnel bored back in 1909. And this tunnel had a peculiar fatal feature. It did not run straight. It curved roughly 90 degrees through the hillside. So if you stood at one mouth and looked in, you did not see daylight at the far end. You saw blackness. A train inside that tunnel could not see another train coming the other way until they were almost touching. On the evening of October 7th, 1965, a fully loaded train heading to the dam and an empty train heading back met inside that tunnel, head-on, in the dark. The locomotives carried something like 10,000 gallons of diesel fuel between them, and it caught fire. The blaze burned out into the dry grass and brush around the hill. 4 men died, the engineers and the oilers on the 2 crews. The tunnel was so badly damaged it cracked the concrete, and the wreck set the dam's construction back about a week. I think about that tunnel a lot, and not only because it's a terrible way to die. It is a blind curve on a single track, with each crew thinking the path ahead was clear, and no way to see what was coming until it was already on top of them. Keep that image, because in 2017, that same project ran straight into a hazard that nobody could see coming around the bend, on a line everybody assumed was clear. And the only thing that changed was that the second time, there was 188,000 people in the path, instead of 4. The train wreck was the worst single day, but it was not the only loss. By the time the work was done, 34 men had died building Oroville Dam. There were floods to fight too. In December of 1964, while the dam was still unfinished, another huge storm hit the Feather, and the half-built embankment did something nobody had planned for. It caught the flood. The incomplete dam held back enough water to cut the peak of that flood dramatically and spare the towns below from the kind of disaster that had launched the whole project a decade earlier. So before this dam was even finished, it had already proven it could save this valley from a flood. And that is the cruel irony sitting beneath it all. Oroville was born to stop a catastrophe like 1955 from happening ever again. And it spent 50 years doing that, quietly, brilliantly. The flood it could not handle, in the end, was not the river. It was itself. The embankment was topped out in 1967. The reservoir filled in under a year. And in 1968, the tallest dam in America went to work. And for almost half a century, it worked beautifully. To see what was actually wrong with Oroville, you have to go back to the drawing board in the early 1960s and look closely at that main spillway chute. Not the dam, the chute, the long concrete ramp that carries floodwater down to the river. A spillway chute is a deceptively hard thing to build well. You are laying a slab of concrete over a hillside, and then, a few times a decade, you are running an enormous volume of fast water down it. The danger is not the water on top. The danger is water getting underneath. If water finds its way through a crack or a joint and gets under the slab, it can do two things. It can erode the ground the slab is resting on, and it can build up pressure that lifts the slab from below, like water getting under a loose floor tile. I want to show you something, because this is the whole story of what went wrong here. I built a simplified model of the Oroville spillway chute. Same idea as in real life. A concrete channel on a slope, and down at the bottom, these blocks, the dentates, break up the energy of the water. Along the floor of the chute, those gray panels, these are the concrete slabs. On the real thing, this is the concrete surface that the water runs down. When everything is working right, the water just runs over the top. Watch. Clean. The slabs stay put, the water stays on top, and the dentates do their job at the bottom. This is a spillway doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Now, watch what happens when the water gets underneath. All I have done is lift one edge of one slab just slightly. On a real spillway, you do not need a pebble, you just need a crack or a bad joint or an open drain. Anything that lets the fast water catch the edge and get under the slab instead of flowing over it. Now look. There it is, that's uplift. The water gets underneath the slab, and because it is moving fast, the pressure it exerts overcomes the weight of the slab itself. And once one slab goes, the water gets under the next one more easily. On my model, it is a piece of acrylic. At Oroville, it is a concrete slab the size of a city block, sitting on rock that could easily wash away. So a good chute needs two things above all. It needs to sit on strong, erosion-resistant rock, and it needs excellent drainage underneath to catch any water that gets through and carry it away before pressure can build. Oroville's chute had problems with both, and this is the finding that me, as an engineer, was genuinely shocked to read in the report. The spillway was designed in the 1960s by people who did not have a ton of experience building spillways of this magnitude. The slab was thin in places. The drainage system underneath it was inadequate, and in long stretches, the slab was not resting on the sound, competent bedrock that the design assumed. It was resting on weathered, weak, erodible rock, the kind of ground that washes away when water gets at it. So a flaw was baked into Oroville on the day it opened. A chute that could leak, sitting partly on ground that could not take the water if it did. And the dam, true to its nature, talked back about it almost immediately. Within about a year of that spillway going into service, inspectors noticed cracks in the chute. They noticed water seeping up through the slab and water draining out from underneath it during flows. These were not subtle. They were visible, they were recorded, and they kept showing up in inspection after inspection, decade after decade. Here is the thing I need you to understand, because it is the real lesson of Oroville, and it has nothing to do with concrete. Every one of those signs got explained away, not by villains, by careful, competent, well-meaning people. The cracks got patched, the seepage got noted and filled, and slowly, over 50 years, a dangerous idea hardened into common sense. That this is just how this spillway is. It cracks, it leaks a little, it always has, and it's always been fine. That's just how it is. We have a name for this. It's the same failure that brought down the Space Shuttle Challenger. You see a warning sign, nothing bad happens that time, so the warning gets reclassified as something that's normal. Then it happens again, and it's even more normal. The danger does not go away, it just stops looking like danger. By 2017, Oroville Spillway has been quietly telling people it's been sick for 50 years. And an entire chain of capable engineers and regulators had taught to read that as healthy. And one more flaw was waiting in the wings. Right next to that aging chute sat the emergency spillway, the bare concrete lip with the unarmored hillside below it. In 50 years, it had never once been used, which meant that in 50 years, nobody had ever actually found out what would happen to that hillside if real water ever went over the top. They were about to find out, and that answer would arrive over a single weekend in February. The winter of 2017 came after 5 years of brutal drought. Then, the sky reversed. Storm after storm, the warm, soaking kind we call atmospheric rivers, rolled into the northern Sierra and dumped water into the Feather River Basin. Lake Oroville, which crews had been waiting years to refill, filled fast. And then, it kept rising. To make room, the operators did the routine thing. They opened the gates on the main spillway and started sending water down the chute. On February 7th, with releases ramped up to around 52,000 cubic feet per second, an operator watching the spillway noticed something wrong. The flow coming down the chute looked strange, sprang up where it should have been smooth. They shut the gates to take a look, and when the water cleared, they found a hole. Not a crack, a crater. A huge section of the chute slab was simply gone, and beneath it, the weak foundation rock had been carved out into a pit dozens of feet deep and a couple 100 feet across. The 50-year-old flaw had finally let go. Water had gotten under the slab, the pressure had lifted it, the weak rock underneath had washed away, and once that started, each broken edge fed the next. The chute was eating itself from the inside. And now, the operators are in a genuinely brutal position, the kind I hope I never have to face. The lake is still rising, more storms are coming, and they have one badly damaged main spillway, and they're not quite sure how much more it could take. Every 1,000 cubic feet they put down that chute risks tearing apart even more, possibly up to the gate itself, which would be catastrophic. But if they hold the water back to protect the chute, the lake will continue to climb and eventually pour over the emergency spillway and onto that bare hillside that nobody's ever tested. And it got worse in a way the public barely noticed. The eroding chute had thrown so much rock and broken concrete into the pool at the bottom of the dam that it dammed up the river right in front of the powerhouse. The water backed up around the underground plant's outlets, and to keep that plant from flooding, they had to shut it down. And just like that, one of the dam's normal, controlled ways of releasing water, around 14,000 cubic feet per second of it, was off the table. They were now down to two options: the broken chute and the untested lip. I have to step out of narrator mode here, because I cannot tell about this weekend as a stranger. When it happened, I was a young engineer at a firm in Walnut Creek in the Bay Area, about a couple hours south of the dam, and Oroville was not a news story to me. I had done a bit of work on the powerhouse, and at that exact moment, sitting on my desk, was a design I was helping with for a new outlet works for the dam, a new, controlled way to get water out of the reservoir. So let me tell you what that week felt like from the inside. I remember walking into the office and finding the whole place frantic. Senior engineers all grabbing their gear, hopping in their cars, and driving north to the dam to help however they could. And here's what put it in my stomach and kept it there. The entire emergency, underneath all of it, was about a dam that had run out of safe ways to let its water out. The spillway everyone trusted was tearing itself to pieces. The powerhouse was knocked out of the fight, and that left a bare hillside that nobody's ever tested. I was, at that very moment, 2 hours away, designing more ways to get water safely out of that reservoir. The problem I was working on, in the abstract, had just arrived in the worst possible form just up the road. They tried to thread the needle. They ran the broken chute at reduced flows, accepting more damage to it, trying to claw the lake level back down before it reached the emergency crest. It was not enough. The storms were bigger than forecast, and in the early hours of February 11th, for the first time in the dam's entire history, Lake Oroville rose over the emergency spillway and water began running down that natural hillside. At first, it almost looked fine. The flow over the lip was small, a tiny fraction of what the emergency spillway was supposedly rated to handle. Officials had been told that lip could pass something like 250,000 cubic feet per second if it ever had to. But the hillside was not fine. The water, even at a trickle by the spillway's supposed standards, started tearing the bare slope apart, and it did the most dangerous thing erosion can do. It began cutting backward, uphill, toward the concrete lip itself. We call this head cutting. The erosion eats its way up the slope like a waterfall, slowly marching backward into the cliff above it. The peak flow over that emergency spillway was only about 12,000 cubic feet per second, less than 4% of what they had been told it could take. And at 4%, it was already chewing toward the foundation of the weir. This is the moment the whole thing turns. Because if that head cut reaches the concrete lip and undermines it, the whole thing can fail. And that lip is the only thing holding back the top of the second largest reservoir in California. If it goes, you do not get a controlled release. You get a breach. The estimate at the time was a wall of water 30 feet high, released all at once, straight down the Feather River and into the towns below. That is not a flood. That is a worst-case scenario for the people downstream, the exact catastrophe this dam was designed to prevent, delivered by the dam itself. At 21 minutes past 4 in the afternoon on February 12th, the Butte County Sheriff, Corey Honea, made the call. Evacuate immediately. The order rolled downstream county by county, and within hours, roughly 188,000 people were on the roads, leaving everything, driving away from the dam in the dark while the rain kept falling and the hillside kept eroding. Now, picture the decision the engineers made next, because it tells you everything about how bad the corner was. To stop the water going over the lip, they had to lower the lake, and fast. The only tool they had to lower the lake was the main spillway, the broken one. So they made a deliberate decision to send water down that wrecked chute at almost 100,000 cubic feet per second, fully knowing that they were going to completely destroy that spillway in the process. They sacrificed the main spillway to save the emergency one. They tore up a structure on purpose because the alternative was far worse. And it worked. The brute force release pulled the lake down below the emergency crest. The flow over the bare hillside stopped. The head cut never reached the lip. By the night of the 12th, the immediate danger was easing, even as the main chute below was being blown to pieces. Crews spent the following days dropping bags of rock from helicopters onto the wounded hillside to shore it up. On February 14th, the mandatory evacuation order was downgraded to a warning, and people were allowed to start going home. 188,000 people evacuated, a near total loss of one spillway. A second spillway that came within a margin that nobody is comfortable quantifying of failing. And the dam, the actual dam, the thing all those people were running from, never so much as flinched. It was never the problem. It never had been. When the water came down and people came home, the question was the same one we always ask after these events. Whose fault was it? And Oroville's answer turned out to be more honest and more uncomfortable than the usual search for a single name to blame. The federal regulator required an independent investigation. 6 outside experts were assembled, led by an engineer named John France, and they spent 9 months taking the whole thing apart. In January of 2018, they released a report nearly 600 pages long, and it did something unusual for this kind of investigation. It gave human and organizational failures the same weight as the physical ones. It treated the question of why people kept missing this as seriously as the question of what the concrete did. Their conclusion was striking. There was no single root cause and no one villain. What happened at Oroville was, in their words, a long-term systemic failure, one that was shared by the broader dam safety community and its standard practices of the era, by the regulators, and by the agencies and people who designed, built, and operated the spillway over half a century. A flaw was built into the spillway in the 1960s, and then, for decades, a whole profession looked at the warning signs and read them as normal. The team leader said something at that time that stuck with me. He said that lots of very capable people looked at this thing over the course of 50 years, and it escaped all of them. Read that twice. Not careless people, not lazy people, capable people. The cracks in the seepage were never hidden. They were in every report. The failure was not that nobody saw the warnings, it's that everybody saw them, and everybody had been taught that it meant nothing. The repair was its own enormous project. The main spillway was rebuilt, this time on properly prepared foundations with real drainage. The emergency spillway, the bare hillside, was finally given the armoring it should have arguably had from the start. A reinforced splash pad and a deep concrete cutoff wall buried into the rock, so that if water ever goes over that lip again, the hillside cannot eat its way back to the weir. The contractor, Kiewit, raced to get the new main spillway ready before the next winter. The total bill came to around $1.1 billion. And I want to sit with the one number that makes this story different from many of the other stories that I will tell. 0. No one died. 188,000 people were put in harm's way. $1.1 billion of damage done. And the death toll was 0. That is not because the danger was overstated. It is because a sheriff made an aggressive call, and a team of exhausted engineers made a brutal, correct decision to destroy a spillway. And the erosion, the head cutting, stopped just before the concrete lip. Oroville is not a story about a disaster. It is a story about a disaster caught, barely, with minutes and feet to spare. The dam is still there. It is still the tallest dam in America. It still supplies water to a huge swath of California, and it still talks back through its hundreds of buried instruments exactly as it was built to. I started by telling you the dam never failed, and that is true. So let me tell you what it did. The design failed, quietly, in the 1960s, when a critical structure got built thin and under-drained and partly on ground that could not hold it. The attention failed across 50 years as warning sign after warning sign got reclassified from danger to normal by people who were not negligent, just human. And the imagination failed because an entire system believed that an emergency spillway that it had never tested would behave the way that the paperwork said it would, right up until the day that the erosion started climbing up towards the weir. And here's the part that should matter to you, wherever you're watching from. The reason your local dam is likely currently getting its spillway foundations re-examined, its assumptions retested, it has always done that, explanations challenged by people whose job it is to do just that, is in large part this weekend in 2017. We did not learn the danger of an untested structure from a textbook. We learned it from 188,000 people driving north in the dark, in the rain. They paid nothing, in the end, which is the miracle of Oroville, but they came within a few feet of writing that chapter in blood, the way the village of Longarone did. And on a personal note, that unglamorous thing that I was drawing 2 hours away, the second or third or fourth way of getting water out of the lake, is the whole moral of the story to me. You build the boring redundancy before you need it, not after. You spend the money on the warning signs while there's still just cracks in the chute. Oroville is the bill that comes due when you wait. The dam talked back the whole time. The next time something tells you that it's fine, because it's always been fine, remember Oroville and go look. I have shown you a dam that failed by accident, and I have shown you a dam that failed by neglect. Next time, I want to take you somewhere darker, to a dam that was destroyed on purpose as a weapon of war. It sits on the Dnieper in Ukraine, one of the few rivers that can claim 2 deliberate dam catastrophes in a single lifetime. In 1941, retreating Soviet forces blew up their own dam on this river to slow the German advance and sent a flood into the valley below where their own people were still living. And no one really knows how many people were killed. And then, in 2023, with the whole world watching, the Kakhovka Dam on that same river was torn open, and the water came again. That is the next story on the hydraulic record. And if you want to be here when I tell it, subscribe, and the channel will let you know the moment it goes up. Thank you for spending this time with me. Watch the water, and look twice at the things everyone swears are fine. See you next time.